My name is Jen Dobransky. I am a business advisor with the Maine Small Business Development Center. I'm pleased to welcome you to our webinar today called Choosing the Right Business Entity, LLCs, and More. Our webinar is a partnership with Opticliff Law, which is a Maine-based business law firm specializing in business, small business, and trademark and estate planning. We are thrilled to have our attorney, Andrew Kraus, here to present our information today, and I'll introduce Andrew in a moment. Little bit of housekeeping for you. I, again, appreciate that y'all are here today. We are recording this webinar and we will share it out with you later. In addition to the slide deck, that will be shared out later as well. So check your inbox for that. We ask that you continue to be muted just for best sound quality, but we encourage you to ask questions. So however you want to ask your questions, if you want to throw those into the chat or raise your hand, unmute, ask your question, whatever works best for you. We have some intentional pauses in the slide deck today. So whenever you see our pearlized nautilus shell, for those of you who are visual, you'll know that is a good time for you to ask your question, and we'll kind of turn our way we'll turn away from kind of looking at the materials and addressing any questions. So we'll have those intentional pauses for you. If you have questions kind of beyond our time together, our emails are here, so feel free to email either myself or Andrew. And again, you'll have these emails when we send you the slide deck. So a little bit about the Maine Small Business Development Center. We are first and foremost an educational organization. We are based at the University of Southern Maine. Our mission is to educate and empower small businesses across the state. We are a statewide organization. There is most likely a business advisor in your community or in an adjacent community. In addition to webinars, educational webinars, we offer one-on-one, no-cost, confidential business advising. So if that is something that you are interested in or you need, please feel free to reach out. Go to our website, click on the little box that says request advising. We'd be happy to give you some business advising. So, and just a small disclaimer, which I'm sure Andrew will also emphasize, this, again, the information that we're presenting here today is meant for educational purposes. This is not, the information that we share with you is not considered legal advice. It does not establish an attorney-client relationship between yourself and Andrew or any attorney at Opticliff Law. So I just want to be clear that this, again, is about educating and empowering you with information so that you can kind of make decisions. In terms of our topics for today, we have a little bit of a kind of a legal smorgasbord. We will talk about why to form a business entity and when we do that, and then legal obligations related to that entity formation. Because of Andrew's specialized expertise, he's also able to talk about intellectual property and contracts, so he's going to touch upon those topics as well. When a good time to involve an attorney is, and then we'll summarize for you and take your questions. So without further ado, I'm going to turn this over to Andrew. Thanks, Andrew.
Wonderful. Thank you, Jen. Yeah, I'm really happy to be here. I've been working as an attorney for the past 11 years in the Portland area, and been really involved with like Maine small business and startup community. It's most of our clients are small businesses based around Maine. And outside of my law practice, I've done a bunch of work with Start at Maine, and I really love working with the SBDC folks and organizations like SCORE and CEI. So there's a lot of really I think one of the great things about being a business owner here and trying to start a business is there are a lot of really, really great resources in this community and a lot of great free resources in this community, like the SBDC. So really happy to be here and kind of chat and do a little bit of kind of like a legal 101 kind of a boot camp, so to speak, for kind of the legal side of doing business, starting a business. And so and you'll hear me potentially from time to time tell Jen to next slide. Um, Perfect. So a little bit on, I always find it's a little helpful to talk about kind of like translate some terms, so get on the same page with language when it comes to doing business. So if you just start doing business and have not formed an entity, so when we say entity, we're talking about generally LLCs, limited liability companies, or corporations. Those are the two by far most common types of entities that small business owners create, with LLCs being really, really popular. So if you're doing business, like let's say you're a graphic designer and you wanted a company approaches you to do a logo for them or to create some marketing materials for them. And you do that, and let's say you charge $500 to do that. So if you're doing business and you haven't actually formed an entity like an LLC, what you are considered legally is a sole proprietor. So a lot of people have heard the term sole proprietor. And where I hear it mistakenly used a lot is when they say sole proprietor because they're in business for themselves, but they may actually have an LLC established. So what sole proprietor means is you have nothing established. You're just out there doing business. And that's not illegal to do that. You can be a sole proprietor. You can go charge money for services and provide those services. Now there are some exceptions to that, like you can't go provide, say you're a doctor and provide medical services unless you actually are a licensed physician. But by and large, like you can go out there and do something, and generate income off that without taking any formal action. Now you have obligations associated with that, taxes and whatnot. And like I said, some industries have licensing requirements, but you can do that. And so is it a good idea to do that? Is it a good idea to be a sole proprietor? And the answer to that question, at least from an attorney, is basically no. And like, it's never a great idea. What is a better idea in almost every instance is going to be to form an entity. So next slide, Jen. And is it going? There we go. And so, when it comes to forming an entity, the reason why that is a good idea is it helps protect you, bottom line. And so, in order to do this, and kind of the purpose of this presentation really is to impart and convince you, hopefully, that you should do this. You should form an entity, take the step beyond being a sole proprietor if you are just kind of doing that right now, and think, critically about, hey, should I form an LLC or a corporation? So the big advantage is, I should say, of forming an entity, an LLC, for example, is that you, the owner, you're going to be insulated from most claims or debts of the business, which is really, really valuable. That's what the limited liability means, and it's the same for a corporation that just doesn't have the name limited liability in it. And so that's really powerful. Now, of course, in the real world, like if you start a business and want to take out a $500,000 loan, the bank's probably going to make you personally guarantee that loan. So it's not that you can necessarily like completely insulate yourself from claims against the business. But it allows you to kind of carry on your business without the fear of everything you do coming back to haunt you personally. Again, there are exceptions to that, like super negligent behavior, criminal activity. Yeah, you can't like hide behind a business, having done those things. But it's a really powerful level of protections. Also, I think, you know, especially if you're looking to, the graphic designer example is a good one. So if you're looking to work with larger companies, let's say again, a larger company is looking to hire a graphic designer to come in and do some marketing material for them, like an out of house graphic designer. More and more, and this is because of employment laws, we're seeing larger companies require that independent contractors they hire have an entity established. And again, the reason for that is the nexus is kind of an employment law. But it can actually like increase your opportunities and gives you an increased perception of legitimacy if you have a company established, an LLC. And in order to do that, like it's not overly difficult to take this step. Um, but one important thing to understand the difference between is I do hear people say a lot that like, oh, I went to my town hall and got a DBA on file. That is not creating a legal entity. In order to create an LLC or corporation, that is a filing that gets submitted with the state, with the Secretary of State's office. In just about every state, the Secretary of State's office controls company corporate filings. And so for an LLC, you would file a certificate of formation with the Secretary of State. And for a corporation, you would file articles of incorporation. And that'll carry a filing fee in Maine. It's not that much. It's about $175 for an LLC, for example. And so that is filed with the state of Maine. And once the state approves that filing, then your LLC is officially formed in the state. Like I said, it's not incredibly difficult. There are other aspects of starting a company, especially if you have partners that I'll talk about in a little bit that require more thought and I think is where like legal, kind of ongoing legal counsel is really valuable. But how you do it again is filing at the state level. And just the last thing I'll say here for especially new business owners, a big surprise and an ugly surprise that new business owners sometimes come across are the first time they start dealing with their tax filings. So if you've been working your career thus far, working as an employee of a company, you're used to receiving a W-2 at the end of the year. It kind of summarizes what your earnings were, what your pay was, and then you have taxes withheld out of your paycheck every pay period. And at the end of the year, you have a fairly simple tax return to file, and ideally, you get a nice tax refund if you qualify for it. That process becomes quite different as a business owner. And so the two big things to be aware of are that one, there are varying tax treatments available to business owners. Like if you own an LLC or corporation, there are varying different types of tax treatments, and that you should certainly have an accountant to kind of go over that with and choose which tax filing or tax status makes the most sense for you. So you hear a lot about like S corp. S corp is a tax status, is a tax election. An LLC can elect to be taxed as an S corp. And so just to be aware of that, there are other options. And then the big kind of like be mindful of are when you are a business owner, you will suddenly realize that you have to pay your taxes proactively to the federal government. They do not get withheld automatically. And so you do that on a quarterly basis in advance. And so you make a guesstimate about what your annual tax burden would be, and you make those payments on a quarterly basis to the federal government. And that's just something that's often a surprise that we see with new business owners and can be a nasty financial surprise, especially if they forgot to do the quarterly filings and they get to the end of the year and it's like, oh my gosh, I owe the government $25,000 in taxes. I didn't plan for that. I don't have $25,000 sitting around to pay that because all the money I earned, I spent, I reinvested in my business, I did whatever with. And so if you're not prepared, if you're not holding those funds in reserve, it can be a real nasty situation. Next slide, Jen. Perfect. When it comes to, the big question a lot of people that come through our firm have is like, when should I do this? Like, when should I actually establish this business? If it's really just kind of like planning right now, if you're kind of like ideating and figuring out what you're going to do, maybe you're working on your business plan. So there's no hard and fast rule to this, but the way I like to think about it in terms of when to establish your business. So this would be, when am I going to mail that certificate of formation, and when am I going to mail those articles of incorporation and actually create this thing? I think obviously if you're at the point where you are providing your service, you have clients, you have customers, I think you're thinking critically about doing it at that time. I think whenever you have personal assets to protect, significant personal assets, really makes sense to be thinking about very early on getting an entity established. The bottom 2 points here, they're bolded because they are really, really important. When you if you are going into business with another person, meaning another co-owner, whether it's 50-50, whether it's 70-30, whatever it might be, when you have partners or co-founders, you absolutely want to have an entity established. And as I'll talk about a little bit later, a really good agreement, written agreement between the partners that govern kind of the control, operation, rights and responsibilities of the business. And we'll talk more about that, but that's like vital, vital, vital. One of the most important things, and that's where legal counsel comes in. It can be very helpful. And similar to having partners or co-founders, if you are starting a business where an aspect of your business, the funding is going to be through seeking investors or financing, whether that's loan financing or investors in the sense of people are going to provide the company money in exchange for ownership, equity. That's absolutely you need to have a company established legally to begin really begin those conversations and certainly to close those deals. So again, common whether you're doing like a traditional bank financing debt route, they're gonna want the company to be established, and same with investors. Next slide, Jen. Um, just a couple quick things on keeping yourself protected. So you've kind of formed that company. Great. Now we have the backbone of the business set up, where we have a legal entity. Let's use LLC as an example. So we have that LLC formed. As I'll talk a little bit about later on, we have a good operating agreement between the owners in place. And so another thing to keep in mind is it's not at this point like set it and forget it, right? It's not like, okay, I did that formation process, that's done. I never have to worry about kind of doing anything with my company again. So the couple things that you want to be aware of is that in Maine and in most states, but in Maine, annual reports must be submitted on an annual basis. These are very, very simple filings. It's not like doing your taxes. But you have to submit an annual report to the state of Maine on an annual basis to keep your company in good standing. The state of Maine charges an $85 filing fee to do that for LLCs. Again, it's a very simple filing. It's just a matter of doing it. And same with filing your taxes. Again, there can be some nasty surprises for new business owners of like how taxes work and how taxes are paid. So as to my third point here, really, really helpful to have an accountant and or bookkeeper kind of keeping you on track there. Also in new, I was going to say one more thing, but you don't have to go back. You can go back. That's fine. One quick thing here on this middle point about commingling personal and business assets. This is another non-obvious thing that new business owners are faced with. So again, if you've just been an employee at a company, your whole kind of working career, you get your paycheck, it probably gets automatically deposited into your bank account. You go spend that money. That's your money to do with what you want. Pretty straightforward. When you're a business owner, that now changes again. So people are going to pay your business. Let's say they pay you $1,000 for something. Again, we'll keep on the graphic design train. So you developed a new logo for a company and they paid your business, your LLC, $1,000. That $1,000 goes into the company bank account, or it should go into the company bank account. So you would set up a company bank account. So you now have you now have $1,000 in your company bank account. How do you go now and use that money to buy your groceries and pay your rent? So the way you treat company money is that money is company money. So you can use that to go buy supplies. You need a new computer. You can buy a new computer with it. You do whatever it is you need to do to pay for business expenses with that money. But you can and should, the benefit of owning a business, pay yourself, right? And so you can compensate yourself. Now there are different ways to compensate yourself that we don't need to really like dive into. But primarily at a small business early stage, you're going to do something called take an owner's draw, which is, like I'm going to take some of this money as my personal income. So again, we'll use the $1,000 hypo, say, okay, I'm going to take 500, leave it in there, some of that to cover taxes, some of that to, buy some supplies I need, and I'm going to take $500 as an owner draw. And so you would then basically withdraw that 500 from your company bank account and then deposit it to your personal bank account. And now you have a paper trail showing this $1,000 came into the company, and I've taken 500 of that as my personal draw and put it into my personal bank account. And now boom, go buy groceries, go pay rent, whatever it is you need to do with that money. And you just need to make sure that's accounted for correctly. But what you don't want to do, don't do, is not establish the business bank account and have business payments go directly into your personal bank account. That's called commingling personal and business assets, where like that $1,000 payment goes straight to your personal account. And that can create a big accounting mess. And it can also do what's called basically pierce the corporate veil, which is a fancy term for when you kind of lose the limited liability. And to scare you a little bit, how that would work is if you've only ever been using, like if you've never opened a business bank account and you commingled all your business earnings with what are also your personal earnings, if there is a dispute and you are found liable for something, the court can look at basically the totality of your assets and say that's all on the table because we can't figure out what's company and what's personal. And so that's a really, really dangerous situation to be in. It can give yourself a lot of risk doing that. And so really important to form that business bank account and have business money go into that, and then your earnings come out. And I think we're now going to take a little break and do questions if anybody has questions.
Not seeing any in the chat, but
Cool.
we can keep
If
going.
any come up, I'm happy to just pause at any time.
Okay,
But so
that
if
sounds
anyone has
great.
questions, feel free to drop them in the chat, and I'll get to them. And we can also definitely chat at the end. But
Great.
yeah,
Okay.
cool. Okay, so this sort of ties into what I had mentioned about having really good agreements between founders. So another kind of language word worth defining is equity. So you hear this term equity a lot. So equity basically means your ownership percentage of a business. If you're in business by yourself, you own 100%. You own all the equity. This is pretty simple thing. It's great, it's easy, perfect. When you go into business with other people, or you bring an investor into your business, what you're doing is splitting up the amount of equity. And so again, you have a business partner and you're both 50-50, pretty straightforward, pretty simple. And especially if you're both going to be like fully involved in the business. But a mistake we see some new companies make is they give away equity in their company for very little benefit, or for very little long-term benefit, maybe only a little short-term benefit. So, new business owner, you may not be able to afford to pay people what you need to pay them for them to help provide you services that you need. And you say, okay, I'll give you 5% of my company. I'll give you 10% of my company as payment for this service. Um, I would highly recommend not doing that without really, really, really careful consideration and getting the advice of an attorney. Um, the bottom line here is equity. It's very easy to give it away. You can, giving away ownership percentage of your company and it's very, 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 very hard to get it back. If not, it can be impossible to get it back, or you're going to pay a lot of money to get it back. Um, Going into business with somebody or giving somebody equity in your company is almost like getting married to them. They have a lot of legal rights once they are an equity owner, and it's just not something you should do lightly. And if things do go poorly or do go south, it can be a big hardship for the company. So just to be very aware of that. Don't give equity away without real strong consideration. Next slide, Jen. I think I saw a chat. Did I see a question come in?
You did. There was a question about why, like a lot of folks ask why they need an LLC if they have insurance.
Oh, great question.
Yeah.
Um, both are important. So highly recommend forming an entity. Absolutely also recommend getting insurance. You could call it a belt and suspenders approach, but there's all the other reasons why LLCs and corporations are valuable, such as the different varying tax treatments, the requirement to have an entity formed in order to work with certain customers and clients of yours. There are numerous benefits. That said, like if there is a claim against the business, you absolutely want to have insurance to handle that claim. You don't want to have to rely on, say, well, they'll just take my business, but my personal assets are safe. No, you would certainly want insurance. And on the flip side of that, having insurance but not having an entity, sure, that's better than certainly better than nothing. You would want the insurance again to cover a claim, but you lose out on all the other benefits that you get by having an entity and by having an LLC or a corporation. Again, on the tax side, on all these other scenarios, especially if you're going to have business partners, and a host of other reasons. But you basically, you know, you can get to the point too where if you don't have an entity established and you're purely relying on insurance, there could certainly be situations where a claim against you exceeds the value of the insurance, or you did something and your insurance is like, we're not going to cover. I mean, what's insurance do, right? They deny coverage, right? That's they're there to protect us and hopefully have our backs when we need them. But they're in business to deny coverage when they can, and so you don't want to have that be the only thing standing between you and potentially a pretty nasty financial situation. So perfect, yes, perfect segue to this slide, which is, what I call like the day one activities of once your business is formed is open a bank account, which I talked about, get insurance appropriate for your industry, and there are many different types of insurances in the business world. So general liability is the most common. They kind of every company would want a general liability policy. But you can then get insurances for what are called errors and omissions, which is kind of like malpractice insurance, depending on what profession you're in. You can get transit insurance. Like if you're shipping products, you might need to get an in-transit insurance policy to cover the value of your goods while they're being transported. Warehousing insurance. So there's tons of insurances to get. So just figure out, what's going to be appropriate for your industry. Um, Early on too, you want to obtain necessary licenses and permits. This is often a pretty light lift. Again, there are certain businesses where there are high bars, medicine, law, engineering. You have to go through pretty rigorous licensing in order to provide those services. But for many businesses, it's pretty simple. There might not be any licensing requirement, and you may only have permitting requirement if you have like a physical storefront, or if you're doing food and beverage, for example. There's different permitting and licenses, but doing the research and getting those documents that you need. Um, we can talk more about independent contractors versus employees. This is one where, if you, again, going into a business for yourself, if you need people to assist you, right, to help you run your business, the two primary, options there are: one, hire people as employees, W-2s, or to hire people as independent contractors. There are different rules governing those relationships. There are different laws governing those relationships. And it's important to know the difference and what is going to make sense for your business. The reality is that generally speaking, employees are more expensive to have than independent contractors. And that's why independent contractors are very, very, very common, kind of like the gig economy, right? It's very popular to use that. However, you have to be careful of misclassifying people as independent contractors. And many states are starting to uh, do investigations related to that because there's basically employment tax fraud and evasion going on where companies are trying to be like, hey, every single person that works for me full time is an independent contractor. That's probably a misclassification. So, if someone's working for you full time and they're the only company that they're providing services to, that's probably closer to employment relationship. Whereas again, graphic designer, going to hire somebody to do my logo, they have 50 clients, that's clearly an independent contractor. So just something to talk about and understand as you get to that point in your business where you need to hire help, hire people to come, provide you regular services to make sure you're doing that the right way. And then I'm sure as the SBDC can assist you with, write a business plan. If that's not that might have even been before a date one activity, but I think it's really, really valuable to do that. Next slide. Oh, I got
Andrew,
another. Yep.
yeah, I'm wondering if before
Yep.
I know,
Oh,
because we're
sure
thinking
thing.
about switching. So the question was about the tax implications of forming an entity. It sounds like this person is maybe starting as a sole proprietor and then forming the LLC or
Yeah.
some other type of
So
corporation. Yeah,
yeah, so
thanks.
the first thing I'll say in terms of tax implications is the accountant is the most important person in your life in relation to that question. I don't do tax law, so I don't know this with a fine tooth comb. But as a business owner, here's my experience, which is when you form a sole owner company, when you're a single owner company, let's say LLC, for example, and you're the sole owner, you're going to be what's called a disregarded entity. And so basically the tax implication from your business is going to go on your personal tax return as a Schedule C. Confirm that with your accountant, however. Um, Things can get, once you have multiple owners, you then will have to do a partnership tax return. And or if you make an election, which is a very common thing to do, make an election for S Corp tax status, then you will have a separate business tax return. So the answer to that question depends on the exact legal structure of your company. But for somebody who's going to business for themselves, sole owner, doing it for the first time, you're likely just going to have a Schedule C attached to your personal tax return to kind of take into account the business tax implications. But that can change significantly depending upon elections you make or if you get multiple owners in your business. Um, but any more questions? That would be also a good time. Any more questions about, forming a company? And if I haven't convinced you to do it, feel free to tell me why. But take a few more minutes here and chat about intellectual property and contracts. I'm not going to go into crazy depth on those topics, but just a couple things to look out for that I see and why I think they're at least somewhat important um, for business owners. But I'll just wait a second here to see if anyone had any follow up on the business formation stuff. Okay, I think not. But if you got it, just
Yeah.
drop it in there, and we'll be sure to get to it. So now that you have the company established and you're doing business, what are two areas where I see business owners getting unintentionally get into some hot water is in the space of intellectual property and contracts, and more so contracts. That's like the big one. And so, what I think you should certainly care about these things, know what they are. I mean, everyone kind of knows what a contract is, but know what they are, know why they're important, and know what to look for. So I think Jen, you can go to the next slide. I can't remember which one I'm doing first. Probably IP. Yeah. So intellectual property, again, more on like defining what is this. And when we talk about intellectual property, what a business owner really wants to care about is ideally not infringing other people's intellectual property rights and protecting their own intellectual property rights so they aren't infringed by others. Different industries, different businesses, it'll be more or less important here, right? If you're selling, for example, like how concerned should I, business owner, be about intellectual property? If you come to me and say, I am selling my products on Amazon, you need to be like very concerned. Not concerned, but I should say you need to be aware of this and you need to be able to protect your IP. You need to start taking actions. You probably need to start thinking about trademark filings with the USPTO. Like, big deal. Same with like Etsy if you're a product seller in e-commerce, you clothing brands, cosmetic companies, things like that. This is should be top of mind. If, however, you're going to open a mom and pop general store, single location in just anywhere up in Millinocket, for example. Um, totally necessary, viable, great business. You'll probably have a much lower level of concern of intellectual property issues arising. Not that they can't, I have seen it, but it's just you're much lower risk profile. But still worth knowing what we're talking about here. So four general types of intellectual property. One is copyrights. Copyrights are anything, any work basically that you create. So it could be a written work, blog post. Boom, that's a copyrightable material. A photograph, every single individual photograph you've ever taken, that you own the copyright to. Graphics that you design. And so that is like the actual content that you produce. And so what most people are familiar with are copyrights, just because you interact with them all the time. And believe it or not, you all own probably thousands and thousands of copyrights. If you've ever, again, taken a photo on your phone, boom, you own the copyright to that photo, or written anything or anything like that. The other type is trademarks. Trademarks are brand names, logos, and so Nike, the swoosh, Just Do It. Basically, names or designs that identify a company or a product or a service. And then we have less common and less impactful for most businesses, patents, which are the laws governing protection of inventions. So again, there's certain industries where patents are way more important, pharmaceutical companies, technology companies. If you are in machining, hey, I build a new engine. I have a client that builds orthopedic braces, for example, for like for feet and ankles and knees, and they have some patented braces that they develop. So patents cover those kind of physical inventions. And then the last one here is trade secrets. And trade secrets are kind of your data, your recipes, secret sauce, so to speak. And there's no real like registration of a trade secret, but you just keep it a secret by keeping it a secret, right? Just protecting it and not letting it be public, not telling it, for example, to everyone that you come into contact with, and that might even work for you. Classic example is a recipe for Coca-Cola. Coca-Cola probably has tens, if not hundreds of thousands of employees around the world. You'd probably count on one hand the number of people that know the recipe. But with copyrights, trademarks, and patents, those are what I call registerable intellectual property, meaning, with copyrights, you can register your copyrights at the US Copyright Office to increase your protections. And then with trademarks and patents, you can register them with the US Patent and Trademark Office, the USPTO, to solidify your ownership and rights to those marks. So how do we protect IP? If you again mostly this is going to be in relation to trademarks and somewhat copyrights, but trademark is really important because that's how customers are going to identify your company and identify your brand. Um, where applicable, as I just mentioned, you can seek government registration. So that's again with copyrights, the U.S. Copyright Office, and with patent and trademarks, the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office. Getting your intellectual property registered, again, it greatly strengthens your ability to enforce your rights, and it just gives you really strong protections for that mark. You also, as part of that process, especially if you work with an attorney or a law firm, you can do some due diligence to see, hey, is someone else using my trademark already? And so should I rebrand to something different? Like if I want to protect my brand, is this first one I've developed, is it going to be registerable, or am I potentially infringing someone's rights before, and I should make a change now? Um, the other important one for protecting your IP is a little bit of a pivot. Um, and it kind of dovetails into the contracts, which I'll talk about in a second. Excuse me, is using if you are going to work with other businesses, so if you're going to hire independent contractors to provide you a service, again, graphic designer, go back to that example. So you're going to hire a graphic designer to develop your company's logo. You want to be familiar with and use something called a work for hire agreement. So when under the law, when something is, I use the hypo of like every photograph you've taken, you own the copyright to it. That's true because how copyright works is that the creator of something owns it upon its basically creation and what it's called when it's fixed in a tangible medium, which you don't have to remember that line, but basically once it's created and done. With a photograph, that's pretty instantaneous. If it's a designer doing a logo, it might be at the time once the logo is actually finished, being like, I am done. Here's the thing. So the law kind of defaults to the creator owning something. And so if you're hiring someone to provide a service to your company, you want to be sure you own what is created, or at least have really strong rights to it. And so a work for hire agreement is a way to say, hey, I'm hiring you to provide me something, to make something for me. But just so we're clear, I own what you create because I'm paying you for it. Now, this happens by default in an employment situation. So when employees create something on behalf of their employer automatically owns it. But outside of employment, so again, if you're hiring contractors, 1099, you are not going to have that automatic transfer of ownership. So you want to be really careful about that. I've seen some bad situations happen because of work for hire agreements not being used. And then finally, if you're a business where you create content, so I have clients that are, for example, like coaches, right? So they'll go in and be like, we provide coaching services to other businesses to help them improve their workflow, whatever it might be. And our value is all this content we've produced that we share with our customers. You want to have clear policies in place for how your customers and clients can use the content you provide them. And usually that, means you can use this for your internal purposes, but you can't go resell that content, or maybe you can't use that content once you stop paying us our monthly fee. But you do want to, hold on to and protect your content and make sure even your customers understand what uh, what they can and can't do with it. Um, Next slide. And I see a question here about covering the pros and cons of different types of entities. We can definitely talk about that for a few minutes at the end. That being said, there's not too much to talk about. I think the more important question is, it makes sense to do one of them. We can definitely do the pros and cons, but at this stage, there's not a ton to talk about there. But yes, I will certainly address that. Actually, I'll address it now. It's a question slide. Perfect. Perfect timing. So, going back to entity selection, with sole owner companies, LLCs are really, really common. They're simple, they're flexible. They allow for multiple tax elections, which at the end of the day is what most people care about, is getting the best bang for their buck from a tax perspective. And so they're very, very common. Where we see corporations more commonly used is in scenarios where the business is going to be seeking investors. Now, there are certainly other scenarios, but that's a really, really common one. And so, for example, when we work with our clients at an early stage, it's like, okay, like what's your funding strategy? Are you looking to bring on investors? And more often than not, at an early stage, we're going to form an LLC for our client. And then they might make one or more tax elections. But corporations, again, if you have a larger entity, a larger business, you may be looking at a corporation, or if you want to, again, bring on investors, if you're looking to do like an employee stock option program plan, a corporation can make more sense. But again, in an early stage, we see LLCs being the most common, but also another common strategy, which we end up doing a lot in our firm, is a company formed as an LLC, and they've hit some milestone, they're bringing on investors, whatever they're doing, and as a part of that, we actually restructure the company to a corporation. So that's really, really common. We're going to get off the ground as an LLC, keep things as simple as possible, and then convert to a corporation if we need to. There are exceptions to all those things, but LLCs are really popular. And in terms of partnership versus LLC, that's only going to be in a situation where you have multiple owners. And again, LLCs are way more popular now, limited liability companies, than limited liability partnerships. And so, that the differences between those is a little bit in the tax side of things. But we form like zero limited liability partnerships. They're just no one really uses them anymore. LLCs have kind of taken over everything. LLCs are the relative new kid on the block. They've been around for maybe 20-25 years now. And they've really kind of replaced limited liability partnerships. All right. So just this last section, and then I'm happy to just take more questions. But contracts, if I can stress anything to you, it's this: use written contracts whenever possible, and in all situations requiring agreement. Why written contracts? And as you see my last point there, I've got a lot of handshake agreement war stories. Like, they keep us in business, but not in a good way, right? We don't like that our clients are coming to us, or people are coming to us saying, "Oh, I made a handshake agreement." It's like, oh, come on. And there's a lot of bad things that can happen out of that. And so written contracts are really, really valuable because they establish your rights and obligations of each party, and also what you might be liable for. I think they're really helpful for setting expectations in a deal, so that both parties are taking the time to really hash things out. They can protect and secure your intellectual property, and other assets. I'll tell one handshake agreement war story, which is, a client came to us and had purchased a business, or purchased, excuse me, real estate on a mostly on a handshake. You can't really purchase real estate on a handshake basis. And so he bought the real estate, and on a handshake basis, purchased a lot of stuff that was inside this real estate equipment. And sure enough, comes time for him to take possession of this piece of real estate, shows up, and the building's empty. And a pretty, we're talking like hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of equipment that he thought he was getting with the purchase of this real estate. But he never actually entered into a written agreement and a bill of sale to purchase that equipment. And whatever happened. and the seller, had obviously emptied out the warehouse and legally still owned the equipment that was removed. And so that individual, had a pretty bad day, realizing that they had no real strong legal claim to the ownership of that equipment. But he thought that he had secured ownership on a handshake deal. And so, written contracts are super valuable because they serve as the evidence, right? If there's no written contract, there's no strong evidence, then it can be really, really hard to prove your point or to prove a case when there's a big, big disagreement. So we can hop to the next slide just to keep moving here and make sure we get to questions. Oh yeah, my favorite thing, my least favorite thing, I should say, my favorite least favorite thing, which is if you ask your lawyer to review something after you've signed it, it's kind of too late already. Ask your lawyer to review something before you sign it, because once you sign it, you're obligated to whatever the terms and conditions are. And so every now and then we get that request being like, "Hey, sign this agreement. Can you review it?" It's like, why? I mean, sure, but if you wanted to change something or are unhappy with something, it might be too late. So definitely have people review something or a lawyer review something before you sign it, not after. And last, just a couple slides here on the vein of working with a lawyer and attorney. These are kind of the things I think about when do I want our clients to call or email us? Obviously, if they're served with a lawsuit, this is very rare, but served with a lawsuit or any kind of government demand scary letter that you receive. There are also, I think, as we're becoming all more and more in tune to it in this world, there are a lot of spam um, efforts around spamming businesses and threatening legal action that's actually not legitimate. And so we do get a lot of our clients or frequently see clients saying like, "Hey, I received this email. Is this legit?" So always a good idea to talk to your lawyer about those. I like, encourage people if you have a new contract, good time to check in with your lawyer. Intellectual property issues such as registration, ownership rights, really good time to talk to your lawyer. If you are talking to investors or you have a potential co-owner of your business, forming what that ownership agreement is going to look like. Again, it's often called LLC agreement or operating agreement or bylaws if it's a corporation or a shareholder agreement. Really nailing that down. And then anytime you're doing the purchase or sale of business assets or real estate, as that war story I just told, really good time to talk to an attorney. And then my last slide, just as a few takeaways, and then I'll get to these questions that are coming in. Um, Parting thoughts are in terms of co-founders, it's the good, the bad, and the ugly, right? Like having a business partner, having a co-founder can be massively beneficial. It really can help you sometimes get over the hump and grow the business. You can have complementary skills, divide and conquer. I have a business partner. I'm incredibly grateful for my business partner. Allows us to go on vacation and not stress about the business. It can be an amazing thing. But things can go bad and get ugly, right? Or there can be issues. And so that's where having a really strong written agreement, a written operating and partnership agreement, I think it's just so important to talk about those things, plan for scenarios. I mean, we see scenarios where one of the owners of a business might suddenly pass away unexpectedly. It's like, okay, like, it's a horrible situation, but maybe you had a plan in place, and that can really kind of help the business navigate a really difficult time. Use service providers wisely. So attorneys, accountants, those that you need to kind of help keep your business in compliance, be prepared. I always encourage people to, they keep good records, take notes at meetings. One of my favorite, least favorite things is when I have a meeting, whether it's a half hour, an hour meeting with a client, and then they're not taking notes, and at the end of it, they're like, "Okay, can you email me a summary of what we talked about?" Sure, I can do that, but now instead of billing you an hour for that meeting, I'm billing you an hour and a half to A, have that meeting, and then B, write up those notes and send them to you. And so, again, if you're efficient and prepared and taking notes, you can literally save time. Time is money, usually when working with service providers that bill hourly. Keep all agreements in writing. We just kind of talked about that, even if it's a verbal agreement. If you make a verbal agreement, at a minimum, follow up with an email and say, "Hey, it was great talking to you. This is what I understand happened." Beware of the internet. There's a lot of good resources out there for businesses. There's a lot of really bad resources out there and dangerous resources out there. So just be aware of that, and do what you can to protect your assets, keep things in writing, register your IP, and the like. So a couple of questions came in, and I want to make sure I get to them. So,
We've been trying
oh,
to
that's it.
kind of answer them a little bit, but
Perfect. Yeah, I see Pete's chiming in here. Okay, I was reading Pete's answer. I was like, wait a minute, that's not a question. Okay.
there was a question about the difference between a partnership agreement and an operating agreement
Oh,
and the difference between those and
no,
why I need both. Yeah.
you don't. Yeah, sorry. So I'm just using different words to mean the same thing. So we'll use operating agreement as the term. So in LLC speak, they're often called LLC agreements or LLC operating agreements, and that is the agreement between the owners and the company. In corporate world and a corporation, you would have bylaws and or a shareholder agreement. And then in the partnership world, you would have a partnership agreement. So they're just different names for what is serves as kind of this big document that controls the rights and responsibilities of the owners of a business. Oh, that's Pete again. Okay. Think,
Let's
doesn't
see.
a C corp have certain requirements with having a board? Yeah, okay. So sorry, Darren, I missed your question here. So doesn't a C corp or a corporation have certain requirements with having a board of directors and additional annual report requirements? So a corporation can a corporation does not necessarily have to have a board of directors. Corporations in Maine can be what are called shareholder run or director run. This is getting a little into the nitty gritty. Commonly, yes, corporations do have board of directors, and they don't really have additional annual report requirements in Maine. It's still filing of an annual report in a timely basis. Corporations do, however, have to list additional information, which is you have to list who serves at a minimum as the president and treasurer and a clerk of the corporation, which can all be the same person. You can have a corporation of one, a board of one, an officer suite of one, and you have to list, if you have them, directors. But sometimes you see corporations that are shareholder run and don't have directors, and absolutely not worth getting into why that's a difference. But yeah, boards are common in corporations, and in LLCs, you can actually have a board too. They're just called managers. They're not called directors. Uh, I think that's. Oh, here we go. Up there, yeah, you had another question. Okay, so when you are naming your LLC or your any company, do you need to make sure the name isn't already taken? Are there legal issues around choosing a name? So, yes. Well, two quick answers to this. One, the state of Maine will not permit two companies to share the exact same name. And so it's very easy to see. You can look up in the state database, is the name I want to call my company taken in the state of Maine? If it's not taken, the Maine Secretary of State's office will generally accept that filing, and you can get it. But that doesn't necessarily solve trademark issues. And so, if you want to start a cosmetic company, for example, and call it Seacoast Cosmetics, just made that up out of the blue. Maybe that's available in Maine. Great, cool. But it turns out that there's a company in New Hampshire called Seacoast selling cosmetics, and they have a federally registered trademark. They could accuse you of trademark infringement once you launch. So even though you formed your company and got your name registered in Maine, that's not necessarily the end of the story when it comes to choosing a name and protecting and having rights to that name.
Great. I think that we've reached the top of the hour, and so I just want to be respectful of the time. I did include the name search link through the Bureau of Corporations, so folks
Oh,
can
perfect.
search for that. We've also included, if you want to give some feedback on the webinar today, feel free to scan the code or follow the link. It's placed
Yeah.
in the chat as well.
And I see one more question just came
Yes,
in
yeah.
about sole proprietors. So, no, a sole proprietor would not register their business name with the state of Maine because if you're again you're registering with the state, the Secretary of State, you would have to be forming an entity. So you'd have to be forming an LLC or a corporation. Again, for most businesses nowadays, LLC is by far the most common because it's so flexible. But you would need to form a legal entity. Again, with sole proprietors, sometimes city hall or town halls will allow you to register your DBA as a sole proprietor, but that gives you no legal protections. It's not really that impactful. So what you would do is file it. If you're filing with the state, you'd be creating an entity, and you would therefore no longer be a sole proprietor. You would have graduated, so to speak. Yeah, and if people do have more questions about getting into the difference between the entities, of which again, I think LLCs are by far the most common and useful and most valuable for new business owners. Beyond that, it becomes a lot about, are you bringing on investors, and do you have more complex tax considerations? But an LLC by and large is going to be the main focus, and what's probably going to be the most appropriate for small businesses getting off the ground.
Great. Well, thank you, Andrew. Thank you for taking the time and sharing all your knowledge with us today. And thank you all for joining us. Hope to see you next time on the next webinar. Have
Wonderful.
a good
Thank you so
rest of your
much.
day.